Okay, so in this video, I'm just gonna talk about my note-taking methods, my research methods, and basically how I used to write essays in university. This is for undergraduate studies. So the two kinds of people that may be interested in watching this is probably undergrads who are starting university, and as a general kind of video for other people that may want to try and start studying, history and strategy. This isn't a foolproof method. Actually, it's just my method, right? I don't think there is a right or wrong way to learn anything. So I'm just gonna put out there what I do. The example I'm gonna use today is nuclear strategy and the history of development of nuclear warfare. The reason why I'm picking that is that because I still have my university notes, which you can see here. These were notes that were taken from actually two different modules. I think I wrote about 3 essays in total. These are basically all the notes I have from just that subject that I studied. The overall degree that I studied was International Relations and Military History. That was the title of the degree itself, but the modules here were related to strategy and intelligence, basically. If you're starting out in university, at least in the UK, or maybe I should narrow it down, at least in my university, I'm going to try and avoid names wherever possible, so yeah, I'm not going to tell you which university I went to. All I can say is that the English royalty is part of our alumni. That's as much as I will say. So the way it worked in my university is that you had about 3 semesters, but only 2 of them were academic semesters where you get taught and where you have to submit assignments and then do exams at the end of the semester. So the way it happened for all the modules that we had to do was that there were usually 2 or 3 assessments for each module, and every semester you take about 3 to 4 modules. Sometimes you can take 5. That's because of how the credits are rated per module. For this one here, we only needed to do 2 essays that were our assessment, so it was 50% each for each essay. I'm just going to go through how I studied for one of the essays. So you'd have about 6 weeks to write. So you have 6 weeks to read and do your research and then write the essay and then submit it. So that's the kind of time frame that we had. If you're coming from just a Joe average dude that wants to just study it normally, you won't have any of these time constraints. But because I'm going to talk about how I did it in university, how I studied in university, I'm just going to show what is possible. So 6 weeks, you get the essay question, and then you have 6 weeks to write the essay. So first things first is the essay question. I can't actually recall what all the questions were. I do have one. I managed to find one, and the question that I scored, and this is the one that I scored the highest marks for. Should a state rely on a nuclear deterrent strategy to achieve its national security objectives today? Today meaning I think it was 2022, somewhere around there. So you get the essay question, and once you get that, what you then do, well, at least what I do, is you compile a reading list. Now, if you're lucky, which in my case I was, your lecturer or your module coordinator will already have a reading list that's been written, and you can usually access that at the very start of the semester. I didn't do that, however. I just went and did my own thing, because the thing about international relations and thing about military history and strategy is that it's a very, very broad subject, and you have many differing opinions, many different schools of thought. And I didn't enjoy my time in university. I will make a separate video talking about the general things about my time in university. But for the purpose of this video, all you need to know is that I didn't like it. And I didn't like it because I had nothing in common with anybody that went to that university. in common, in not just the sense that I was a foreigner, but just in like the way you thought about life itself. Could not connect with anybody on anything, like even the simplest basic stuff as well. And that was the case for this module as well, including the lecturers. This includes not just the students and my peers, but the lecturers as well. You just fundamentally disagreed on like basic principles. So I went and, made my own reading list. So my general rule of thumb is that I'd start with trying to compile books that were published before 1990. And the reason being is that when you read books that were from, old books, air quotes old, you find that there's a lot of emphasis on history, and there's like a sort of like old-timey wisdom that you can find here and there, paragraphs within like, hard text that are like technical, which you don't find in modern books. Modern books are more focused on like, critically analyzing, taking things apart, and then synthesizing information. It's very, very dry, and there's like very little wit to it. Older books, you can have this sense of like style from the author, which, I'm maybe not explaining it properly, but hopefully that makes sense. I start with old books first and then work my way forwards and then select all the different books. And the internet is very, very helpful in identifying the books that are on the topic material that you want to do. So in this case here, the essay question, which I described just now, we're looking at nuclear deterrence and we're looking at strategy. And for that particular question, I decided to focus on the United States just because most of their documentation throughout the Cold War, that's all pretty much readily available. Cold War has been over for 3 decades now. You can get a lot of stuff that has already been declassified. So that was, to me, like the simplest one. Could have done Soviet Union, but I was more interested in what the Americans were doing. So the main focus here, as you can see throughout most of the reading lists and all of the notes, I'm going to show like all the books and the articles that I read, and I'll show what the notes were that I took. All focused on American development of nuclear strategy, nuclear warfare, and the way that they approached it. Start off with the books. I always start old school. I start with like the oldest I can find and then work my way forward. Caveat to what I said just now, you don't want to just limit yourself to everything that was published before 1990, just because, there's always new information that's being released. You can't ignore, periods of publication history just because you don't like the way that people write. You do need to get, the information. I always start old school. So the first one here, Strategy in the Missile Age. This was the first book that I picked up for the beginning of the semester, written by Bernard Brody, published in 1959. At least the version I have that I read was from 1959. Oh, no, I'm getting mixed up with another book that he read. Yeah, 1959. You can get this book for free. It's on the RAND website. It's the PDF, the whole PDF file is there for free for you to download. One of the big reasons why I picked this book and why I'm talking about this book first is that this dude here, right, he was not just an academic. He was and is regarded by historians as being the first nuclear strategist. He didn't just write about it. He did make the policy, or at least he helped influence large parts of American nuclear policy from the very beginning. This guy was a proper Cold Warrior. And the book here that he wrote, this isn't the first book. He wrote another book called The Absolute Weapon, I think. That's the one that has slight different publication dates than I've got mixed up in the past. But Strategy in the Missile Age, this remains my favorite strategy book, just because it's not only a book on strategy, it's also a book on military history. The first part of the book is just military history. It's the development of strategic air power, the use of airplanes to fight and try to win wars. And not only that, this book, if you read it now, is itself a piece of military history. Just because the dude who wrote it, he ended up making strategy and making policy. Well, he didn't make the policy, but he influenced strategy and policy. And quite a lot of his work and influence is still, felt today, is still relevant. So Strategy in the Missile Age, I've only read it once, cover to cover. I intend to read it again, but yeah, it still remains one of my favorite books that I've read on strategy. So if we go through just the technical aspects of the note-taking, you see that I always draw a margin here. Technically, I'm not entirely sure if it is correct to say, but before university, I was taught the Cornell note-taking system. What I do is, I don't think it would be considered to be that note-taking system. I think I just made my own up. But basically, you want to draw the margin here so that you can keep some space on your notes so that you can write things after you've taken the notes. So it's like the notes for the notes. That in itself is not doing justice to it, because this part here, these are the notes. So you read the book, or in this case, you read it, well, I usually read it chapter by chapter. You read it chapter by chapter, you take down all the things that you think are important, or things that the author is trying to convey to you, all of his arguments, all of his ideas and thoughts. And once you've done that, you come back to the margin here, and then you fill in the margin your own thoughts, or at least this is what I do. I either fill it in with my own thoughts, or what most of the stuff that you'll see written in the margins is information that I recall from other books or articles that is relevant to this specific part that the guy's talking about. That may sound a little bit confusing, but hopefully it clears up as we go on here. So the main part of the notes here, this is what you read, what you think is important, what the main points that the author is trying to convey. So you write that down into the main part here. Usually at the end of each chapter, you're supposed to, in the Cornell note-taking system that I was taught at least, you draw another margin at the end, and then at the end here, you synthesize everything that you've written so far. So you've distilled the information here, right? And then what you do is then you distill it even more at the very end. I usually didn't do the last part. Actually, I don't think I've ever done it except for my final parts of my notes, which I'll get to that later. But yeah, that's the general gist of things, is how you're supposed to do that. But I didn't. So Strategy in the Missile Age, you go through chapter by chapter, page by page, you take the notes, and then you revisit the notes through the margins. You add down your own thoughts or other things that you've read in the meantime, if they're relevant to whatever it is that's being talked about in the book. You put it down there, and you go through the entire book. I haven't counted how many pages this one is. I think Strategy in the Missile Age is only like 300 pages long, so it's average book size. But this is not for light reading. This is a hard text. Well, when I say hard text, I mean that I don't mean that the language or reading it is hard. It's my way of conveying that this is technical stuff. Right? It's history of development of nuclear strategy, and then nuclear strategy after that. Yeah, maybe the word technical is what I should be using instead of hard. I'll see if I can use that term from now on. So yeah, that's how notes is for here. But as I said at the very beginning, you make a reading list. So there's multiple books. So this one here, yeah, the first one. But as I'm going through it, I don't just read one book at a time. If you do that, things don't really work out. At least in my case, it doesn't, because everyone has very different reading habits. So for me personally, if I'm reading a book, I can't read more than 100 pages of that book before I get saturated. And basically, I can read the words after the 100th page, but nothing is going into my head. And I'm not like learning anything, I'm not understanding anything. So that's the limit there. But what I do then is that I go read another book, and that's the way that I manage to read enough to get enough source material in the 6 weeks to finally write the essay. As a rule of thumb, I follow a guide that was written by Jordan Peterson. I'll put the link below to his guide. It's a very good guide for essay writing, and I use his rule that for every 1,000 words that you write, you should have at least read 5 to 10 sources. So 5 to 10 books or articles. Okay, it doesn't have to be like a whole 10 books, but 1, 2 books and then like 3 articles or so for every 1,000 words that you intend to write on your essay. That's like the rule of thumb that I've adopted, and so far it's worked out fine. So we go on to the I'll just show 3-4 books here. Yeah, these weren't all the books. I don't have all the notes, but I'll just go through what I have here. Arms and Influence, Thomas Schelling, 1966. I really like his prose much more than Bernard Brodie. Bernard Brodie is very, very dry and technical, but Schelling, he's able to distill like historical information and historical lessons going all the way back to the ancient times. He incorporates that into at least this book. There's another book that he's written that I'll get to that later. But Arms and Influence, another technical or quote-unquote hard text, is just pure strategy and of course the history and development of that strategy. Arms and Influence is a little bit different because it more so deals with deterrence itself. Strategy in the Missile Age has a lot of technical details regarding weapons. So we're talking aircraft, missiles, use of submarines, the nuclear silos and mobile launchers, all that kind of stuff. Arms and Influence is more on the theoretical side of strategy regarding deterrence. So once again, you do the same, well, in my case, do the same thing. You go through chapter by chapter, page by page, write down the notes here, and then in the margin, you revisit notes and incorporate anything that you've learned. So I read these 2 books simultaneously. So anytime that something overlapped, I'd revisit the margins and put something down there. So there's that. Arms and Influence. Strategy and Conflict, also by Thomas Schelling. This one, I hated this book just because I was kind of tricked. This book was supposed to be for a secondary assignment. It was supposed to be a book review, but the problem is that I read this over the summer, and I was using the reading list that was provided for the last cohort's assignment reading list for this assignment. What happened was that once I started my year and the new semester, this and only 2 other books from that reading list got taken off the reading list. So I went the whole summer reading this book, which I absolutely hated. I think if I were to revisit this book and if I were to, guide anyone who's reading this book, you only really need to read the first few chapters and the last chapter, because the rest of this book is almost pure mathematics. Strategy or Conflict is a book about game theory. Game theory is a field in mathematics that, well, I'm not really qualified to talk about it, but game theory, a branch of mathematics, you got a lot of matrices, and you've got a lot of, they call it strategy, but if you were to, take more conventional stance, like the use of armies or air forces or anything like that, you won't find anything too helpful in game theory to help you out with that. Thomas Schelling, he found that there were a lot of similarities for game theory regarding nuclear strategy, because nuclear strategy is quite a bit different, especially when we're talking about deterrence as well. It's far more different than conventional strategy of the use of armies to conduct campaigns and all this and the other. So that was this book here. Yeah, I glossed over a lot of the mathematics. You won't see any of the numbers in this in my notes here. Yeah. Well, there's that. So those are these core three books that I remember, because these two I enjoyed a lot: Strategy in the Missile Age and Arms and Influence, and this one because I hated it. So that's that. Now you get to the other parts here. Now you'll see that these two notes for books, they are quite thin. That's because you are not obligated to finish a whole book if you don't want to. And in this case here, I was looking for very specific information, right? I already have the essay question, so I already know what are all the parts that I need, or at least I'm looking for, to help me write the essay. So in the cases here, Ballistic Missile Defense by Ashton B. Carter. This guy actually became Secretary of Defense for the Obama administration. I can't remember the first or second term, but this book, written in 1984, it was still during the Cold War. This was very, very, very interesting, and he's written another book also on this topic. These ones are super technical. This book here in particular, and the other one that he wrote, I don't know what the title is. This is basically the mechanical workings of nuclear missiles, and in this case here, missile defense systems. Once again, a very, very hard text, quote unquote. But yeah, I didn't read the whole book. I just went and looked at the stuff that was relevant to my question. And the way you can find out what is relevant and what's not relevant is, just read. By reading, you get more information about what you want to read. So if you start with like the base core books, well, in my opinion, from my experience with this whole essay that I was writing, started with the core. This is what I consider to be the core three, and from there on, you have more than enough information to find out other books, the specific chapters that you want to find that's going to be relevant to you. So Ballistic Missile Defense, super technical, like more technical than Strategy in the Missile Age. This was all about the mechanics of missiles. Deterrence in American Foreign Policy. This one is theoretical and far more academic. I didn't like this one at all, but it was necessary because this one, I'm pretty sure, was a more modern publication. Still had a lot of information that is relevant, and yeah, went through that, read that. This one here, you have very early developments of nuclear strategy, so post World War II, and then the 1950s, so Eisenhower administration here. Yep, that was that. So that's all the notes for the books that I have on hand right now. So now we go on to articles. Well, articles are just shorter things to read. They can be anywhere from like 10 to 40 pages. One way you can always get by is just read articles. I know some people that did that. Well, to be fair, I don't know anybody that actually read that was on my course. I'm pretty sure somebody did, but it was a big class. Well, we had bigger classes. But yeah, I didn't know anybody who actually read. Yeah, especially like reading the whole books. Don't know anybody that did that. I should go back to what I was saying earlier regarding like how much to read. I think at this point in time, I was capable of reading anywhere between 150 pages to 300 pages a day. Because remember, this is only one module, right? What you're seeing here. I had 3 modules per semester, so this isn't the only reading that had to be done. I had to do reading for another 2 essays that had to be written simultaneously. So you keep that in mind. I think usually I'd aim for like 25, 50 pages in a book per day, and then switch to another book and then read another 25 to 50 pages and then switch to another book. And of course, the other thing you can do, we're getting here, is the articles. Articles are far more shorter, so they're not easier to digest, but there's less information to digest. That's going there. So here, usually you only have like a couple of pages that you get notes out of an article, just because of the shortness compared to a book. So it's still the same. You still have a margin. You distill down everything that's relevant, the main points that the author is trying to convey, and then in the margin, you put down your own thoughts and any other information that you can cross-correlate from other things. So in this case here, it would be not just other articles, but also the books that we've read. Put that in there, and then continue on. So we've got here an article by Schelling, again, 1985. Bernard Brodie, again, 1978. You don't want to always just keep reading a handful of dudes, because then you restrict yourself, right, in terms of point of view. It's always important to try and expand your horizons and learn what other people are thinking about it. And most of the rest of the articles here, that's what I did. Operational deterrence. These ones here are more modern publications. Colin Gray, he's a pretty well-known academic and scholar regarding strategy in general. I had read one of his articles, another one from him. This one, I can't recall who wrote this. This one I don't think was actually an article. I think this was a publication by the U.S. military. I think this was by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So every now and then you get documents, government documents. I think for this particular essay, I actually read the Biden and the Trump administration's strategic guidance book, or was it National Security Strategy? I can't remember what the exact names were, but the US government and UK government as well, they actually publish publicly their strategy for the nation. And you can read that, and I did do that here, but I don't have the notes for those on me right now. I don't know what I did with it. Pretty sure I threw away the one written by Biden administration because that was absolutely terrible. The last few notes here that I have, I didn't color code it, but this one is from a couple of chapters from John Lewis Gaddis's book on grand strategy. This doesn't have anything directly related to nuclear strategy, but like I said, you don't want to restrict yourself in terms of the information you're gathering. So I've got John Lewis Gaddis here, Clausewitz. This one was the short introduction book. I actually do have the on war text, and I have read parts of it. Out of that entire book, I think I've only read the first part of it, which is within the book itself is book 1. It's a collection of all the books. That was the only part of that book on war which I read from start to finish, just the first part. I will need to revisit it again. But yeah, I don't have the notes for that on war. That's another very technical and very hard text to read, at least for me. So yeah, that's all the notes that I have here on hand. It's not all the notes that I had during university. I've already lost some or threw away some. But yeah, so that's that. So those are the books and articles. So if you got this far, we've gone through all of the information that we're gathering. Now you come to the synthesis or synthesizing of that information, which is what these yellow markers are here for. So these notes here, this is the combination, collection, the final outcome of all the things that I've read, right? So they're split up into different categories, not really categories, but like points of information. So in this one here, one page, 2 sides, is just simply what is deterrence, how and when does it work. And this is synthesizing all the information that I've read from here. You put it down. So once again, you're still following the Cornell note-taking system. So you have the main points here, and then anything extra that comes as a sort of like afterthought or information that you didn't quite remember at the time, but remember later. So yeah, it's basically a cheat code for writing on paper. I could never write notes on a computer. I need to write it down on paper. Use a pen and paper. And every now and then, I like to draw lines to connect things. Sometimes my notes have lines that go from like one end to the other end. And that's, that's the way my mind works and how I store the little bits of information all over the place. So yeah, synthesize it all. And this is the only note that I have where I followed the original method. You draw another margin at the end, and then you distill and synthesize the distillation and synthesis at the very end. So that's an example of one of these notes, which I color code into yellow. And these were the rest here. So this one is regarding arms control. There are several chapters in the books regarding arms control, and there were several articles that were written just on arms control. And this here is the notes of those parts of the notes on arms control. And after that, these ones were like what I call like light notes. So nuclear strategies and U.S. strategic nuclear policy. These are just like the things in the back of my mind that I wasn't too fussed about making sure I knew where I got the information and why. I should backtrack here a little bit. When you're writing an essay, you're writing an academic essay, you need your sources, right? You need to have citations. This is why it's important to, in my system at least, it's important to have the books, names in the margins here. Always write down the pages. Well, not all the pages, but as you're going through the book, if there's something important that you've read and you need to note down, always remember the pages, because when you write the essay, you don't want to go through the whole book again to find where did I get this thing and where did it come from. Because in the essay, unlike if you're Joe average blogger but to write, the difference between the academic and the average Joe, citations. That is like the bedrock of almost everything academic in the university. Citations and the bibliography at the end. So going back to this, these were the ones that is more for my own thoughts, because this was a subject that I had personal interest in. So every now and then I just get a piece of paper and then write down things that I was interested in that had nothing to do with the essay itself, but something that I might want to revisit later on. So these are what these notes are here for, and they don't have any markers on them. So there's that. Despite the fact that I did do that, I have very rarely come back to these notes. Trying to make a change on that, so we shall see. So so just to recap, we've gone through the essay question, we developed the reading list, read the reading list, taken the notes, synthesized the information from the notes. Now comes writing the essay. I'm not gonna really analyze the writing of the essay part, because that would take a very long time, and I want to try keep this video short. I've already talked for 34 minutes straight. Well, some of my friends said that they like to hear me ramble on. This video is a test to see who's telling the truth and who's lying. Yes. But writing the actual essay, I won't go into detail on that. All I can say is your lecturer should already be telling you how to write the essay. At least that's what happened for us. For our first year, we had lecturers that were teaching us on the side how to write the essay. So you go figure that one out. Or you can go back to the guide that I talked about earlier, Jordan Peterson's guide. That one is also pretty in-depth. I would follow that, to be honest, because it was very, very detailed and it worked basically. For the folks that are just trying to, study history and strategy, as a hobby or whatnot, yeah, you don't really need to write an essay. But what I have been told is that writing essays is a good form of learning. And I would encourage people to write essays. I mean, I have written essays that weren't part of the curriculum for university. I've written things for myself, to myself, basically, as a way to help learn. The thing about writing an essay is that once you put down everything that you've learned, it sticks more. I think Richard Feynman, the physicist, he said something upon that line regarding his teaching methods, is that I think just teaching somebody else what you've learned, that helps you learn as well and retain information. So yeah, writing essays. If you're, like I said, the part of the second party watching this video who's not an undergrad and not somebody who's going to university to study, you just want to do this, as a hobby, you want to like learn in depth into things. You don't need to go through with the marking of the pages and all that. You don't need to color code or sort it out. Remember, this is just my method that got me through there. The basic gist of things is, read widely. You start off with the question. In this case, if you're just reading it as a hobby, you pick the topic and then you go through that. I'd always recommend that you pick 3 books of whatever it is, the topic you are, and then read those and finish those. And then after that, you will have more than enough information to identify what other things that would interest you and that would help reinforce whatever it is that you've learned. So there's that. So hopefully you found this video helpful or entertaining. The only last thing I can say is regarding the mechanical parts of note-taking. I've seen a lot of videos of people where they've got fancy notebooks and fancy systems, or if you're using a computer, you've got fancy applications to do that or whatever. Mine is super easy, right? This thing only costs 1 ringgit 50, so that's like, I don't know, 10 US cents. Yeah, that's that. The paper here is just foolscap paper. This is just a Bic pen. Yeah, this is dirt cheap. That's all you need. You don't need no fountain pen. You don't need have a leather-bound notebook or this, that, and the other. That's all nonsense, man. The whole point of this here exercise is to learn, right? And the knowledge is the treasure here. And so long as you get something out of whatever it is that you're reading or studying, that's the only thing that's of any real importance. All these things, physical, nonsense. You don't need it.